There she is, Lexy. How are you? Awesome person.
Thank
Miss you. How are you?
you. I miss you too. I really did miss you last week. I thought I was going to get over to your neck of the woods, but the fires kind of kept us away.
Yeah, it has been crazy. You safe up there?
Yeah, we're about 20 miles away. Smoke's bad. It's
Yeah, yeah.
California.
It's
Oh,
California.
Al.
Obviously, the fire.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
I just wanted I just wanted to say how much you inspire me. I apologize for not having listened to you more lately. Your personal journey, the what you are doing right now, and you're focused this today on social justice, and your willingness to talk about diversity and inclusion, and probably more importantly, that people data for good actually has kind of informed some of my actions lately too. So thank you.
Well, I mean, it's mutual, and yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, coming from you, it means more than I can express. So thank you. And it's also the case that you have been a cornerstone of the community, and your research too has inspired me. And I love what you've been doing, and I'm certainly eager to enter into this discussion because it is, I think you'll agree, spot on around people data for good and how we can better people's lives and create a more fair and just workplace and society.
Yeah.
So, with that, do you want to tee up your work and we'll get into it?
Yeah, I want to introduce myself just a little bit though, in case people don't really know me,
Yep.
because some of my
Please.
background really informs what I'm doing, and I've been in the tech industry for over 50 years, all my career, and I was like the first woman in many of the organizations where I worked for probably the first 10 or 15 years of my career. And so, kind of what's happened with, equality for women has certainly impacted my life. Um, I've been a researcher since like the 80s, and I actually learned something really early on. And it's kind of like my mantra in a way, which is that any technology that we're implementing is a catalyst for change. Okay. And so, like, early on, I was focused on office automation and personal computing, and then self-service, and social uh, networks, and now people analytics. And in each of those sets of technology deployment, it's just a catalyst for the change you want to make happen. So like what you do has to be driven by your values, and your values are people data for good. And one of my values is I really want to have more equity for women, and given this confluence of what's going on now, also for minorities and diverse groups. I'm a member of two. I'm a female and I'm an old woman. So I want equity in so many ways. So
Mhm.
you kind of made me reflect on where I've come to, and why I'm now kind of focused on diversity and inclusion. And by the way, one other piece of background: I ran the Sierra Cedar survey for its first 16 years, that looked at HR technology adoption and the value that it gives to organizations. I've done a lot of value engineering, so I know the business case for just about any technology. And now, for the last 4 years, after I retired the first time, I get to talk to customers of people analytics and find out what they're doing. And it's been really interesting to see what they're doing with diversity and inclusion. So, just a little
Well,
background.
yeah, it's and again, I just want to emphasize. I mean, your work. When I first saw it, I was like, I gotta go hug you, and I think I hugged you every time I've seen you, just because it's been such not only inspiring, the substance of it, and thank you for sharing that. it is about change. And it invites the question, is the change intentional? And is the change been driven by the vendor community, or has it been driven by the organization who's actually going to adopt it and implement it? And that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But ultimately, I think you'll agree, organizational leaders need to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're about, and utilize technology to bring that to life. Would you, echo that? And how does that relate to
Yeah,
the work that you currently?
yeah, I mean, within Visier, yes, we're a vendor, and what we do is, in support of what customers are doing. But I really kind of more reflect the voice of our customers. And so what I'm seeing right now was really well articulated by one of our customers the other day. And it was around, this is a more a morality moment, that is driven by COVID, by the economic impact, more negatively on women and minorities, and Black Lives Matter. And, so
Mhm.
for this particular organization, their CEO says this is a morality moment and we need to continue this journey that this particular organization has been on for well over 15 years, of working to create equality in the workplace. So, I hope that it's not just vendors, kind of driving the technology changes, but I'm really hearing it among customers as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, I mean, tell me and tell our viewers about your recent work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because I know, as you just shared, you're a researcher. You've been focused on this theme around D&I for not only recently, but throughout your career, as you mentioned. So, what's top of mind for you right now, given everything that's happening in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. So, my thinking about diversity and inclusion has kind of focused a bit on the inclusion aspect. Organizations are doing an increasingly, thanks, better job on kind of reporting the diversity numbers. But when it comes to looking at inclusion, I've been thinking that the definition of inclusion actually needs to be augmented. And it's oftentimes defined as being, inclusion is being part of a group, or part of a structure, being part of a dimension, having equal rights. And it's about the experience of working in an organization. And it's often couched in terms of feelings of inclusion. So having a sense of belonging and feeling respected. Um, does that resonate for you, that that's the kind of typical definition of inclusion?
Absolutely, yes. And I understand that you have some slides to share on this as well, yeah?
Yeah, and not quite yet. I want to keep on this topic of inclusion. And what
Okay,
and
let's
what I
do it.
propose.
I'll follow your lead.
Yeah, no, thanks. What I propose is that the definition needs to be expanded. And, again, this kind of comes out of my personal background. It's like, diverse groups want to be able, I mean, I love feeling included, but I want to make a difference. So that it's not just inclusion is not just a feeling of inclusion, but it's the ability to be able to make a difference. So what does that
Mm,
entail? It entails, being able to participate in the right places where, you can make an impact that will,
mhm,
direct business outcomes. Um, so, by reframing the definition beyond feelings of inclusion or a sense of belonging, that we have to measure through employee engagement surveys or sentiment analysis, we can begin to measure differently, and even with some of the data we have. So I think about what's going on with organizational network analysis, and that can kind of show participation in key discussions where decisions are made around strategy, around product development, around budget, around succession planning. All those places where really key decisions are made. These are the ones that I think make a really big impact on business outcomes. And so all this work that's being done around relationships, the critical relationships that facilitate success, and being able to look at that, and then look at the gender differences, and then in correlation with something like promotion data, we can ensure that we can ask the questions: are women and minorities being promoted equally? And then we can do something about that. We can ensure that training programs are designed to help females or minorities build the right internal networks for equal promotion opportunities. And then the other thing I've been thinking about is, if you augment this definition of inclusion to reflect that people want to make a difference, well, we end up getting into positions where we can make a difference. Ultimately, people may want to be the CEO, or they want to be promoted. So, why can't we? And CEOs oftentimes come from business operations where they had revenue responsibility. So let's look at, do females and minorities head up revenue centers or cost centers? Let's take a look at that data and see whether there's an opportunity to, give females and minorities opportunity to lead revenue centers, such that they get that experience to ultimately, get the positions that make the most impact. Does that make sense? Am I
It, it,
reframing
it,
inclusion in a crazy
it
way?
makes sense. No, quite the opposite. It actually gives me chills because I think it's getting to the root of the problem. Let me explain why. I had lunch a while back with a good friend, colleague at a very prominent company, and he was talking about how the top line diversity metrics were actually looking better. There were more minority groups represented in the organization. However, they existed relatively low in the organization, and they existed in clusters. And there was higher turnover among those groups. So while the top line metric, oh, we're more diverse as an organization, it wasn't truly inclusive insofar it wasn't pervasive up and down the hierarchy, nor to your point, and this we didn't qualify this, but I imagine in places of influence and elevated opportunity. So I think you're really calling out because analytics is multidimensional, and you're getting into some of these key dimensions. So kudos to you because I certainly celebrate it. It needs to happen.
Yeah, so thanks, to what you're saying about your discussion. We actually have a new report that's going to be coming out. The title is something like, breaking the glass ceiling. And, because we have, you know, 10 million records on employees in organizations, we can actually look at, what's happening with promotions, with succession planning, with females in leadership. And we had a report that came out earlier this year where we were able to show that organizations have actually improved the female leadership retention. Um,
Mm.
and I think our customers in some ways are, kind of, by their very nature of adopting people analytics, they've adopted a best practice, and they've got other
Mm.
best practices going on. And, so they're doing a better job of retaining females. So we wanted to see, we wanted to look more closely at what was happening there. and we asked the question about which gender is replacing people who leave. Are males replacing more frequently? And yes, that's still the case, particularly at the top. But when we look lower down in the organization, females are starting to more frequently replace. So it's very
Mm.
interesting. So it's maybe not yet at the executive level, but it's definitely lower down in the organization. So, there's so much progress that needs to be made, but there is some indication that at least when we look at females, that they're moving into successive layers of management. So there's hope for the future.
Well, I mean, that's a great story. And just to be clear, that narrative that you just put together is predicated on having the data and the platform by which to analyze that data. So it's again, correct me if I'm wrong, in your experience, it's beginning with the end in mind and making sure these pieces are in place. And if you understand that they're not in place, then you're not going to have this insight, and you're in turn not going to be able to take appropriate action. Is that how you're seeing the world as well?
Yes, of course, of course. And
Well,
I mean, yeah, I mean, we give a lot of capability to organizations. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no,
We
no,
got a
no
little
apologies.
lag
I just,
here.
it's kind of a simple statement that I just put out, but I'm taken aback by how many organizations are struggling and say, well, we can't do that. We can't get that. And I was like, well, if you don't go after it, it's not going to happen by magic. You need the data, you need the systems by which to collect the data. And sometimes they're a separate system, Visier being one, to actually analyze the data and distribute that insight to broader communities. It's a call out that seems, again, for us living in the space is like, oh yeah, of course, but for many others, I think it's worth just stating explicitly.
Yeah. So, last week, Stella and I were talking on an HCI webinar, and one of the questions that I was asked is, like, where's the best place to, address diversity and inclusion? And I'd been talking with one of my colleagues about this, and, basically, there's no one place. It's across the employee life cycle. There are places within, what we do to attract the right talent, to develop them, and to retain them. And I wanted to share 3 slides to talk through this a little bit. So if I could have my first slide. So, and forgive me, I always have to use notes a little bit. Um, so
All good.
you know me, I'm a better writer than I am a speaker, but I shouldn't say
You're doing
I
awesome.
shouldn't say things. Thank you. So attracting candidates, I mean, the question you want to be asking, is there any bias in attracting employees in the applicant process? Are women, are minorities fairly represented from the top of that, talent funnel of applicants that are available to an organization, from that top candidate pool all the way through to hire? So the chart that I have here is from one of our customer stories. It's an industrial manufacturer that's very much committed to gender equity, and so using analytics, that they've been able to find that women perform as well as men. Once they're in the organization, in many cases they outperform them, and they also stay longer, but they weren't able to make progress towards equality. They thought they had a retention problem, but what they actually had was an attraction problem. Now, it's an industrial manufacturing firm. Um, so it typically is male dominated, and they hire, they get their engineers from schools that primarily teach more men. um, they were able to look at their talent acquisition process by looking at this talent pipeline funnel, and they uncovered that, in fact, the amount of women applicants was disproportionately lower than for male applicants. And then also, as women moved through the hiring process, more women were dropped during the interview process. So that led them to a couple of actions. One was to address the fact that women were being dropped during the interview process, and so they initiated some unconscious bias training. They extended their interview panels to be more inclusive, so not just made up of white males. But then they also needed to start working externally to ensure that the university programs where they got their engineers were focused on attracting women and minorities to provide, a better feeder pool for their potential hiring. So, here, kind of looking beyond their organization to really, impact what's happening in society in general, and, encouraging the universities where they recruit to extend their programs to women and minorities. Do you have any comment about this, or would you like me to go on to talk about kind of where data is being used in the
I just
develop processes?
Yeah, you can talk over to the development. I just want to say one thing. I think you're again spot on insofar as it's a systematic solve. And there's obviously organizations out there, everything from MZ, LinkedIn Talent Insights, and on down the line, who are shedding light into what's happening in the talent markets, and also the fact that we have to have educational institutions and organizations get more closely aligned like they were 30, 40 years ago to ensure that the talent of tomorrow is going to be developed today. And there's still misses there. And I believe socially we can do a lot better. So again, I believe you're spot on that, educational
And
institutions
with
have to help.
Yeah. And with data, I think one of the places to start is for an organization to benchmark themselves, and you've
Mm-hmm.
mentioned some organizations that enable organizations to do that benchmarking. We do too,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a place to see, where do we stand versus, our communities, our competitors,
Yeah.
our organizations that are like us. But then,
Yeah.
if we go
Yeah.
on and let me look at the next slide on the develop category. Um, here, again, we're looking at whether development and training and promotions and movement and performance reviews and succession planning, do women and minorities get equal opportunities for these activities? How long do they wait for promotions? And is it comparable across the organization? Does it vary by location? Does it vary by role? So, here's an example, where whites get, promoted in about 7 months, Black people a little over 6, so that's great. But the Latinx, almost 9 months, the American Indian over 12, so here's something to explore. And where we can ask ourselves and talk about the insights. We can look at answering the question of, do they receive the same amount of development and career path opportunities? Is there anything going on with the performance review process to indicate there's some bias that's limiting promotions? And are they equitably reflected in succession plans? Um, and then if we go on to the next slide on retain, we can use data to also see if there's inequities here. Is there any bias against minorities and women and other diverse groups? Are they leaving at higher rates? Is pay equitable? This is a representation of pay showing that underrepresented minorities are not paid equitably in comparison to white workers. So the first column, that's the average, the next white workers, and the final is the underrepresented minorities. And while the pay is pretty similar at the lower levels, when you get to the senior level, it is the underrepresented minorities are paid considerably less. So we could also look, at turnover and analyze the drivers. Are people leaving because of fair pay, lack of fair pay, lack of opportunity at the top? Are women leaving at a particular, point in their job progression because they just don't get the career development needed to prepare them for the top jobs? We hear so many great women leaving to form their own companies. So there we got to look at the exit interview. They're just not getting the opportunity to, excel in the companies where they are. So they're going to go out and do it somewhere else. Anyway, there's
Yeah.
so many places that we can look at data to as along the employee life cycle and across the employee personal cycle. I think Stella will probably talk about that.
Yeah, it's congratulations on doing this work. It's obviously very important. I have a question for you, but I'll set the stage like this. And you likely saw this, and it was in a congressional hearing, and there were a bunch of bank executives in the room, and the question was posed: Is your successor a woman or person of color, or something of that nature? And no bank executive raised their hand, and it was a group of white men. And so it was, truly tragic, and it lays evidence to what you just put forth. So my question is, why aren't organizations generating reports and taking action? Because not all organizations want to go to this level, because, what do you say to organizations who aren't doing this?
Shame on you. No, you know, yeah,
But correct me if
but
I'm
the
wrong. Not everyone's doing it. Not enough organizations are doing it.
I mean, I have this laboratory, if you will, of organizations that are adopting people analytics, and
Mm-hmm.
they just are. They are
Mm-hmm.
looking at this moment in time, and putting attention on their transgressions, possibly. Um, I mean, organizations are just, I think they have. I I hope this is a sustaining question that we're going to have, but this is a moment in time. I love the idea of this being a morality moment. COVID is impacting
Mm-hmm.
women and minorities. The economy is impacting women and minorities. Black Lives Matter is just so horribly egregious that organizations that don't mirror the communities where they hire from and work in and sell to are not going to be around. So I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's going to be a profit motive that makes them continue to look at this. But I feel blessed and very encouraged by our customers that are taking a look at this and have the tools to to shine a really valid light on what their numbers are, and then they're doing something about it. So like you, I have a little hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Of all this madness that is happening, it is creating some real conversations and real action, and you're
Yeah.
providing real data and insights and tools that
Yeah.
help make this visible. So, again, it's going to be a team effort, of course, and I'm glad you're on the team. I'm glad you're a leader on that team, and so I certainly,
Yeah.
again, celebrate you, celebrate Visier, and so thank you for sharing today. How can people learn more about your work and you and Visier?
Yep. So, Visier.com, we have a magazine, Clarity magazine. I gave you a slide that that actually came from me and Stella of just some things that we're specifically doing around diversity and inclusion. This big book of people analytics on diversity and inclusion is really quite stellar. I'm referencing the female leadership retention report. And to see what we're doing, sign up for Clarity magazine. It'll give you a notification about this report we've got on cracks in the glass ceiling, but also just give people insight into, what Visier has been doing. And we've done a lot. I'm really proud of the company I work for. It gives me a place to hang my hat and be able to make a difference.
Well, again, celebrate what you do personally as well as Visier. I'm a fan as well. So, again, thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing what you do, and look forward for the smoke to clear and for us to take that beach walk before too long, huh?
I am coming down in mid-September, so I'll let you know.
All right. Yeah, please. All right, Lexi. Thank you very much. You be well. Yeah.